Okay, so we're taking a look at nested for loops here. This is the assignment, creating a program that will output a specific number of rows and columns generated by the user, and fill each row and column with a special character selected by the user. And they tell us the special characters: exclamation mark, the @ sign, pound or hashtag, the money sign, the percent sign, the caret sign, the ampersand, the asterisk, the open parentheses or close parentheses. And they give us an example here which uses the ampersand. There's 3 rows, and 1, 2, 3, 4. There are 5 columns. So now that we have the assignment, we can go ahead and get started. And of course, we're going to need some variables. The first variable we're going to need is the number of rows. We're going to dimensionalize that as an integer. And the number of rows is going to store what the user has entered when we ask them, how many rows would you like? And because we have number of rows, they also have a choice of the number of columns. We're going to dimensionalize that as an integer as well. Now, these green underline variables, don't worry about those. Those will disappear. The reason they're there is saying because they're not used in the program, but we will use them. We also need a character symbol. We're going to dimensionalize that as a character. Now, the CHR symbol will hold what they have entered, the exclamation mark, the @ sign, any one of these symbols. We also need to dimensionalize what we call a row counter, and that's going to be used for our for loop. And we also need a column counter, which will be used in our nested for loop again. I need to set the row counter to 1, and I need to set the column counter to 1 as well. So make sure these are spelled correctly, and they are. Now I want to ask the user, so I'm going to write line. I'm going to ask the user, how many rows do you want to construct? I'm going to put a question mark at my closed quotes here because I'm using customizable text. And the reason we're asking this is because if we look at the assignment, it says create a program that will output a specific number of rows and columns generated by the user. And I need to store that into the variable. And that's why I created number of rows is to hold that value. So I'm going to use int number of rows equals console.readLine, and it's going to read what the user has inputted. So I need to also ask them how many columns do they want. So how many columns do you want to construct? And I'm going to do the same thing, except for this time I'm going to use my int number of columns is going to be equal to console.readLine. We are reading the line to see what the user has entered, and we are storing that back into the number of columns. Now, I need another one because I need to know what special character they want to use. So console.writeLine. And this time I'm going to ask them, what special character do you want? Now, when I ask them what special character they want, they may not know what that means. So we need to make sure that we tell them what that is. So we're going to open a parentheses. We're going to put the exclamation mark, the @ sign, the pound or hashtag sign, the money sign, the percent sign, the caret sign, the ampersand, the asterisk, my open parentheses, and my close parentheses. I have all that there, and I need to close my parentheses because I opened the parentheses here. So these are the special characters that they can choose from. Now they're going to input something, so I need to use my variable, my character symbol, which is going to be console.readLine. So now that I've done that, I know how many rows they want. I have stored that into int number of rows. I know how many columns they want. That has been stored into int number of columns. And I know what special character they want to use. That's been stored in the character symbol variable. So now that I have all that, I need to figure out how to generate an output like this. So we use what's called a nested for loop. So for int row counter, that's going to equal 1 to int number of rows. So now that I have this, I know my row counter is going to be 1 to the number of rows. It's going to do this the amount of times whatever the user has entered. But I also need not just number of rows, I need another for loop for my columns. So for int column counter, because I need to keep track of how many times it has happened, and 2 int number of columns. So now it will run as many times as the user has entered the number of rows and columns they have done. Now, inside my next statement, I need to make sure that I write out that symbol. So console dot write, and I'm going to go ahead and use write. If I use write line, I'm going to get the special characters in a straight line. So that's why we just have right here and not write line. And I'm going to get rid of my parentheses because I'm not using customizable text. I'm using what the user has entered as their character symbol. So once they write that, I'm going to go ahead and I need to make sure that it generates a new line every time so it's not straight across. So after this next loop, I'm going to write console dot write line, and I'm going to go ahead and leave that blank. That way it goes to the next line. So let's go ahead and run this and make sure it looks good and make sure it works. So how many rows do you want to construct? Let's go back and look at this. So the example they gave us had 3 rows and 5 columns. So that's what we're going to use. So how many rows do we want? Let's say we want 3 rows, we want 5 columns, and the special character, everything's showing up like we want it to. We're going to use the ampersand, and we get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So 5 columns and 3 rows. It works perfectly. We're going to run it again, try it with something else, just to make sure it's going to work like it should every time. Let's do 2 rows. Let's do 3 columns, and let's use exclamation mark, and it works. We got 2 rows and 3 columns. I saw something there that was misspelled. And right here, how many? That's not spelled with an H. So we go ahead and fix that. So when we come back down here and look at this code, for int row counter equals 1 to int number of rows. So on the first time we said we wanted 3 rows. Then we have the column counter, which is 1, 2, 5. It's going to run 5 times because we wanted 5 columns. So we have these nested for loops running together. I want 3 rows. I want 5 columns. What do I want to happen? I want to fill it with that character symbol that the user chose. And this part right here, if I take this part out, it's not going to work right. So let's run this and see what happens if we don't include that. So we're going to do 3, 5 in the ampersand. And you see it comes out as a straight horizontal row. And that's why we have this console.write line. Is so every time it runs or when it generates those rows and columns, it goes onto a new line. So let's take a look at that again. So now that we have that console.write line, it's going to put it on a new line when it runs. If I don't have this, it's not going to work at all. So this console.write line is extremely important. If we change this console.write to console.write line, here's what's going to happen. So we'll do 3, 5, we'll use the ampersand again, and notice it comes out in a straight row. And that's because the write line will put all the character symbols on a brand new line. And that's why we have write instead of write line. If you have any questions, you can always post a comment. And that's going to be it for this one. We'll see you guys next time.